Hi, my name is Aiden. This is my vlog post on my YouTube channel, also labeled Aiden on the Era. I have a WordPress blog and a Tumblr, which I'm working on, as well as a TikTok channel that is also titled with the same name, Aiden on the Era. I'm going to be talking to you today about the Celtic Kingdom before the Christianization. Now, usually if you Google this, it's going to say you're not going to get it unless you say the Celtic Empire. But let's just get into it. I got some notes here, so I'm going to try to stay on track, but I'm still going to get off track. The Celtic Kingdom, in its uniqueness, is roughly in existence as a current archaeological findings sometime around 2000 BCE, which recently with archaeology may go back even further, being that they're currently doing excavating at the Stonehenge site, which is bigger and older than they thought it is, and has posed a new theory that life started everywhere. And this is being supported by what they've been finding with the indigenous Americans grave sites as well. That we may be wrong about how life started with humanity, and it may have just been everywhere, which is no offense to the African theory, because I like that theory too, but it also validates other cultures as well, that they have the right to be there and they weren't just all colonizers, and so people can do whatever they want and take their land. But let's get back to the subject about the Celtic Kingdom or Celtic Empire, depending on who you want to ask. Okay, basically I told you it came about 2000 BCE, which is what they currently have right now. So this is the most accurate information I have to give to you. Okay, basically, what was the area? Everyone, when you say Celtic, everyone thinks Ireland. Okay, it's not just Ireland. It was a lot bigger than that. So basically, these are the lands that I have found listed on there. And it is Ireland, Scotland, Wales, England, Belgium, France, Spain, and Portugal. Now, those are the official ones. There was an expansion, which I will get into the reasons why they did start getting so successful and expanding so far. Now, they didn't have just one language. You're not just thinking they all spoke Gaelic. Yes, Gaelic is the umbrella term for the languages they spoke, but the reality is they have several sub-styles of Gaelic that they spoke. And the ones that they have are Gaulish, Gaelic, Welsh, Irish, Scots, Old English, which is an interesting mix of Old English and Anglo-Saxon kind of combination, but it's still Gaelic, and Celtiberian. Celtiberian is in Spain and Portugal, which is very interesting because I said there are included, which means those of you who are curious who have French or Spanish or Portuguese ancestry, you didn't originally speak those languages. Those were derived from Roman Latin. That's the modern languages that was forced on you by Roman occupation. You spoke Celtiberian in Spain and Portugal, and in France you spoke Gaulish. So if you're curious, it's interesting to go look back, and with the archaeological findings with tomb sites and things like that, we're really turning over old history that's been incorrect and getting new information. What was their governing style? Okay, well, the governing style was kind of similar to Greece, but a little bit different because they still had villages or chiefs. So it's a semi-quasi-city-state governing style. And they had, basically, you had chiefs, you had elders, you had druids, you had kings and high kings, and then the gods on top because they were a nature-based pagan religion. With the druids having a very interesting status, moving up and down the political ladder in the area because of being both historians and the record keeper of religion and culture. So they had this interesting up and down kind of movement in there, and a lot of freedom and a lot of respect that came with what they did. Because writing system didn't come until much later because everything was oratorial, because that was the tradition of the style. And it's very community-based, which is the reason why it was that way. Okay, they still had witches though. The witches were in the culture, taking care of the villages and the people in the places that they lived around and near. They didn't get too heavily into politics, though you do see some of the gods that are classified as witches do get involved in the battle referred to as the Toledano battle to which is better described to you if you listen to the videos from the Dunmore Order of Druids. They're doing a much better job explaining that, but basically that's refers to the gods. That's a part of it, but also not a part of it. So, get back to what the human world is. We're doing. Okay. Reading off this to give you kind of an idea. Okay, the religion is unique as its governing style. Each area or region had its own unique interpretation of the Celtic paganism idea, but they were still Celtic pagan. And which you see with certain gods like Lu being just about found in, as far as I can tell, everywhere in the original Celtic Empire or Celtic Kingdom of the Gaels. Is another phrase that you sometimes will find that's attributed to them. And as I said, Druids are the personal record keepers and the keepers of the religion, and so they handle a lot of the ceremonies and the bigger events, and the witches handle the more local stuff. And it is heavily nature-based, with forests and water and the open grassy hills and moors being very important, and therefore we have Fae, which is a type of nature entity, or nature spirit, for those who want to get really technical, that is attributed to those areas and these nature places. People didn't live in, they lived near them, and they were very respectful of them, because that's how everything was in nature, and then man lived next to each other side by side for a long time, which is also supported in some of the books, like I'm going to kill this because I'm American, so I apologize for my Bobian books and those writings like that talked about how close man and gods were until there was a falling out and then they separated, which is why you have terms of fairy portals and fairy rings come up into pagan culture later. Okay, let's see. Next page. Okay. The culture is basically, I'm just going to have to look. This is a honor code culture, which is kind of like you find similar aspects in the Asian culture to as well as the Japanese, but it's an honor code system, which means that it comes around with their insults are attributed to food theft, kidnapping, marital abuse, insults and stuff like that, which means if they were asking, are they? Yes, in a weird way. It's not illegal in their culture. The difference is that because the Celtic people survived by community, you were still expected to have children. So it's not, no, it was. After you have your kid, that you're required to have or whatever, you can do whatever the hell you want. Which is also substantiated in a lot of the writings with multiple lovers and back and forth, and politics gets really entangled and stuff like that. Okay. Now, they were not always war making, though they are very famous for being war makers. They're not actually always war makers. They go to war when you insult them, but they do not go to war all the time. Like Rome is a militant society that is autonomous from their religion, and there's a separation. Their honor code dictated how they did things, so they didn't always go to war. However, they were the most successful, and they advanced the furthest with trade, which is recently found in this wonderful documentary about the ancient Celtic tombs that they discovered, which I think you can still find on YouTube. And it is really good. It terribly changes the idea of how the Celtic people were, because a lot of the things we have based on them is the writings of Julius Caesar and his personal journals, which I'll get to that in just a little bit. Now, they had a trade route system that was pre-existing for the Silk Roads. Everyone thinks the Silk Roads was invented by Europeans, but it may have very well been off of the surviving records that were finally written down by the last few Druid people that were trying to preserve their pagan culture. So they had a Silk Road that traveled very far. If you go to my blog, you'll see a picture of how big the Celtic Empire was in their expansion, so you get an idea of the area they traveled. So it's kind of similar to where the Silk Road was, roughly. Okay, now how does Rome come into this? Rome, as you can imagine, is a militant machine. It is a militant government that is autonomous from the religion, that they've always said that they're the same. They're not really the same. They have the Roman religion that's separate from the Roman government, and it's very militant. Okay. Now, because of this, when Rome gets near Celtic people, there's a problem with Celtic people. An honor-based society, and not all Romans are very warlike. So they start noticing their people were leaving and wanting to go join the Celts and go, let's go be with them. And as you can imagine with my theory, that must have really caused them to clash with each other. And then they saw this as a threat, and if it's a threat because of how big they are, then they had to conquer it. Get my idea? That's my theory. Whether it's true or not, I don't know yet. We don't have the archaeologists to prove it. So it's just my personal theory. Okay. And the reason why I'm saying this is you can look on Wikipedia, look at this. They found statues of Cronos, which is a primordial Celtic god of the forest and nature. He predates Herne the Hunter and other gods like Lurkernop, that are oftentimes attributed to nature and wildlife and death. He's before them. In fact, Herne the Hunter came into existence because Shakespeare couldn't rhyme Cronos. And yes, Cronos. It's a really hard name to say, and there's 1,000 different ways to pronounce it. I understand that it is Cronos. That's why I pronounce it. Okay. Next page. I'm almost done with you guys. Okay. Now, Rome started clashing with them because of this conflict with their different governing styles, and it seemed like a threat. So anything that's a threat for Rome, they conquer it, and that's how they deal with it. They don't make peace. So they first started and they went into Spain and Portugal. But the problem is with Spain and Portugal is they already had colonized ports along the coast. So they were kind of already colonized by Greece, but not officially. Greece just wanted the coastline and they didn't go any further. But technically most people, and I agree, it was basically colonized by Greece beforehand. But Rome goes in and takes over the area about the 8th century BCE, which is the first probably time you get the clash between the Celtics and the Romans. But they don't officially attribute that until later, because there's this weird thing that because Greece was there on the ports, it was already conquered, so it doesn't really matter, so they didn't really consider that a real clash, so it is technically a clash. Okay. Now, the reason why it was called Hispania is because Roman Latin is... A person that speaks Roman Latin has a hard time speaking Gaelic, and as you understand, with the surviving Gaelic language, it's really difficult to pronounce with our modern language, as it's kind of based off Roman Latin and Greece. We don't have a lot of the original Celtic words in our language, so we ourselves have a hard time. It'd be the same thing as like me being American trying to pronounce Celtic words. So they renamed it Hispania. That was easier for them. And they have a tendency to do that. If they can't pronounce something, they rename it to what they want. Which is why if you look at a map, you see the names of the area changing so many times. And that's also my opinion as well. Okay. Let's see. Okay, now they didn't start on the fight in Gaul, in the area, until 100 BCE. That's not to be confused with the Germanic Wars, which happened in 12 BCE to 16 ACE. That's a entirely different war and happened later on. Okay, and so that makes the official occupation of Celtic on the timeline is at 100 BCE, even though they were in the area much earlier, as early as 900 BCE or 8th century with Spain and Portugal. And they already had clashes of wars as early as 390 BCE. And with Rome reaching England and the Isles around 40 BCE, is officially labeled as 100 BCE. And as I said, remember, they found statues of Cronos in the northern border of Italy at 600 BCE, which you can go look up on Wikipedia on that one. And eventually it was fully Christianized after the fall of Rome, and it became Catholic. It was fully Christianized by about 300 ACE, which is roughly the time period. I have seen other dates that said 400 to 600, but it's about 300 BCE, ACE, excuse me, is the time. Okay, so now what is it that everybody talks about? There's writings among Julius Caesar, and he got everything wrong, right? Well, he did, okay. And there's a reason. There's a whole beef story with this. You guys want the dirt on this one? Okay, Mark Antony and Julius Caesar clashed. They probably clashed before, but they really clashed really heavily when they were going through Gaul, which is France, which is the name for that area of one of the regions that was under the Celtic Empire. And the reason why they say Celtic Empire, because each one of these areas were considered a kingdom, and then entirely of the whole, as an entity, was an empire, which is why it was kind of like city-states. Okay, now, the reason why is because of past experience. Julius Caesar became an archaeologist and a theologian because of what he experienced earlier when he was a young soldier. But Mark Antony, if you could attribute to anything besides him being an adulteress and a philanderer and a drunkard, by most other senators' writings about him, you can basically call him a Roman nationalist. He is hardcore, hardline, pro-Roman, anything Roman and everything else is barbaric. And he has been accounted in senator writings of him doing that. Every time he comes back, he talks nothing but BS about each place he's been to. He has nothing good to say. And then when you hear Julius Caesar, he talks about the culture and the religion and the people and how interesting they were, how much he enjoyed himself. He doesn't have anything really bad about any of the people he runs across of, but Mark Antony does. And so therefore everyone assumes he hated them too. That there's, in his writings, now that they finally starting to go over his diary, you're finding that that's not really the case. Okay. Mark Antony was such a problem that whenever Julius wasn't keeping an eye on him, he was burning, pillaging, raping, destroying every Celtic village he came across of. And this became so much of a problem that eventually they got into a conflict. And he warned him once, which is when he said his experience of why he doesn't do this. He said he watched his commander, where he was a young soldier, fall terrible misfortune after pillaging and destroying a village. And so therefore he took that as a lesson never to make enemies with foreign gods. So he doesn't do that. He doesn't destroy religious sites. He tries to let them down, but what he found out was behind his back. That's exactly what Mark Antony was doing. And so it got to the point where he couldn't read anything, learn about any of the people, because he was destroying everything. So he sent him back to Rome under the political umbrella of, I will make sure he holds my seat until I get back. That's not really what it was. He was quite capable, and did on his own, coming back and taking back over his title in his area and running it until he eventually fell prey to illness and died after being stabbed, because they do say found out he was sick, and then he was betrayed and killed. So he didn't really need his help. He could have done it on his own. He sent him back to get one less problem in his hands. Okay. So, as we know, he even warned him of this and said and recounted him in his diary as being hot-headed, that had to constantly be watched. And if he wasn't constantly watched, he'd eventually fall to his own misfortune because of his temperament and the way he acts, which ends up being foreboding because he does eventually die in Egypt. Okay. Now, of course, because of this, every druid left. And because of that, that meant he had to guess. They think he found one person that could translate and understand Roman Latin, but that meant he probably would have been pro-Roman. Or so it's already been, abused into believing that. There's no guarantee that was an actually pagan account. And so that meant he got a lot of the things wrong because he was just guessing. And this person basically seemed like he didn't really know very much. So it means he probably maybe was a grandchild of someone from Spain that was Celtic. It means he didn't really have any attachments to that, really. So he guessed. And so that meant we had very ill-informed archaeological writings, which then later other archaeologists which were writing about it, and amongst other people like that, were going off of what he already had. Which means we continue to perpetuate it of an ill-informed guesswork archaeology because he couldn't get a hold of information. That doesn't excuse it right and wrong, but it does explain why it was wrong for so long. Okay, now, the conversion of the Celts is probably the easiest section for me to cover. Because basically the Roman machine that was the Holy Roman Catholic Empire. The church came in and fully converted the area sometime around 300 ACE with such prominent Catholic figures as King Charlemagne and St. Patrick. Which, if you're going to St. Patrick's story, go look that up, because the real stories are kind of messed up. Which meant that the conversion was oftentimes very violent, and a lot of people died. It wasn't a gentle conversion. It was by force. This meant that the Western European was completely converted over to Catholicism by around that time, and probably by the time about 400 to 600. Because they started reaching up into Norway and Sweden around 600. So we believe it was before that time they had fully converted the area over. And that meant any surviving pagans had to go underground to preserve their pagan religion, which is why now we're able to do Reconstructionists, because they did write some of it down. And unfortunately, they also edited and rewrote some of our stuff and Christianized it. That's why Reconstructionist is so very important, because we have to remove the Catholic Christian stuff out of there to try to get to the real meat of it. And that's why archaeology is very important, because it's studying our tomb sites in our villages, which fills in the pieces that weren't written down because it wasn't allowed to talk about something that wasn't Catholic. And that is what happened to the Celtic Kingdom. Thank you for watching. Hit the like and subscribe button. If you like more content, I'm going to try to keep putting this up. I have a blog on WordPress. I'm working on a Tumblr right now. And I have a TikTok account, which is that and other things. And I'm going to continue trying to do this because this is my passion project. And this is what I like to do with myself in my free time. I appreciate that. Any help is appreciated. I also have a PayPal site if you feel like donating, which is also under the same name of Aiden Omna Era. So you put at Aiden Omna Era. Don't worry about any of the accents because PayPal doesn't accept it, and you can donate there too. Thank you. Take care.